Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm thrilled that we have Douglas Gautier here back to San Francisco. He used to live in San Francisco years ago and now is a die-hard New Yorker, and I've been following his work for quite some time, but in December of '06, in their project called Burst was on the cover of Metropolis, and with a wonderful article, and I thought that Douglas and the work that he's been doing with his partner, Jeremy Edmonston, with System Architects, we really ought to bring them out to CCA architecture. I think their work is at the intersection of so many of the conversations and explorations that we do here in regards to digital modeling and digital fabrication, mass customization, but also our interest and your interest, really, the student body, in mass production, prefab housing, components, and I think that the work of system architects, one of the very few groups that are situating their work that are very digitally savvy and yet are not using the fabrication processes to generate the aesthetic or the agenda of the architecture itself. And so are finding, I believe, a nice marriage between the digital work and the fabrication or prototyping work. What I think is quite interesting and was wonderful about this feature was that it was both providing ideas of a critique and the weaknesses of working in this manner, and also the strengths. And so it's my hope that Douglas will be able to address both of these issues. Their work takes on or exists in the realm of the prototype, and this, I think, is something very exciting for us. And the prototype comes with exactly that, with strengths and weaknesses. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that this evening. And the project, once again called Burst, from what I hear, will be showing up in some very exciting other venues as well. So let's keep our eyes open for that. As well, Burst was published in Time magazine as the Housing Innovators of 2005 and was awarded the 2006 RAIA Wilkinson Award and an Australian Timber Design Award. A bit more about Douglas. System Architects is currently leading Active Shafts, a collaborative research project with Bureau Happold, funded through a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy. In 2006, they were finalists in the Ferris Park Housing Competition, the Syracuse Connective Corridor Urban Design Competition, and the History Channel City of the Future, a Design and Engineering Challenge. They have been the recipients of various other citations, including the January 2004 Metropolis City of the Near Future project, and winning entries for both the 2004 New Housing New York competition and 2003 Seek a Home House competition. You can tell they've been very active. In 2000, they were awarded the Architecture League's Young Architects Award for the series called Second Nature. And in 2001 and 2003, they were finalists for the PS1 Museum of Modern Art Summer Warm-Up Young Architects Program. In 1994, Douglas was a Fulbright Architectural Scholar to the Czech and Slavic Republics for his research entitled Parallel Modernism, Building Practices in the Former East Bloc. For this research on parallel modernism, he received grants from the Graham Foundation and the New York State Council on the Arts. And prior to co-founding System Architects, his experimental work received a 1999 Berlin Architecture Prize and a 1998 citation in Architecture Magazine's Visionary Architecture Award. As well as all of these endeavors, Douglas is actively involved with education and has taught and continues to teach and lecture at numerous schools, including Columbia, Parsons, Yale, and Princeton. So please join me in welcoming Douglas Gautier, a System Architect.
That's kind of an incredible welcome. Just on a personal, I'm really happy to be back here because this is the first place I ever taught. David Meckel hired me before. Before I went to graduate school, actually, and I was teaching drawing here. I won't tell you how long ago, but now David's son is in college. Is the difference. But Tom mentioned a great deal of work, a great deal of projects that we've done over the last 10 years since I returned from Berlin and founded System Architects with Jeremy Edmiston. Let me get this set up quickly. What I'm happy to do tonight is, usually a lot of the lectures that I've been doing or have done tend to be like everything I've ever done, everything that's ever been happening, every competition, every article, every research project, every piece of the puzzle. I'm very happy with the sort of attention that the Burst project has got, because it's one of these projects. At one point in time we had four houses on the table in the office, and the Burst was the least interesting one. It was the smallest, the least amount of money, the furthest away. It's a prototype built in Australia, and it's the only one that survived. But those 5 years of it since its inception have given it. It's been touched and rubbed and looked at and thought about and looked at again, and it still has life. And it seems that its latest life, or number 4 of the 9, I hope it has, is that it's part of the sort of interest in prefabrication. When it comes to prefab, I'd say that we're probably much more interested in the fab than the pre. But one of the things that you'll find if you start doing research in this is that it's a great many failures in prefab. If you build 1, that's a failure in prefabrication. If you build 1,000, you're Eichler, and that's a success. But that isn't quite the same thing. But I think when you look in the history of prefab, you start to understand that it is a turning point or a place for architecture. In some ways, it's the first project young offices do without a client, and it's the first time when you're actually able to gather your head around the architectural issues of domesticity, structure, environment, and the programs that are associated with it. So what tonight is, I'm showing you probably 5 or 6 different projects, all framed around this idea of the prefab, and that's why my lecture is called Tightening and Loosening, because I think that's not only a formal description, it's in some ways a manner of working that the office has taken on. So in order to know about whether you're tightening or loosening, you need a registration point. And I know you all hate this, but I'm starting with 2 versions of the primitive hut. On the left we have Leger, and on the right we have Semper's version of it. In some ways, the history of prefab is tied into those 2 because I think they relate directly to 2 different ideas. One is the idea of mechanized lumber, mechanically cut lumber, which is the 2x4, and the knot, which is best represented, I think, in the work of Jean Prouvé. And this knot and the precision cut piece, it has a whole series of half-lives, which I'm going to share with you interspersed with the project. So you see here, you see the portable colonial portable colonial cottages. So, just even saying when prefab began is a difficult. Is a colonial cottage a prefabricated thing, and then the panelized system of the Prouvé Maison Tropicale, and then lastly, sort of showing the dumbness of 2x4 construction, which is everything in housing and mostly in domestic construction in America, and the elegance of the knot, or the potential of the knot. So I think in some ways the burst represents the marriage of those 2 things. Now, getting there wasn't an easy road. Tom mentioned we we have a flat spot on our foreheads. We weren't happy to lose the PS1 competition once. We had to do it twice. And the second time, afterwards, there's something really nice about being critted after you lose a competition. Terry Riley took us aside and he said, "It was a great project. You went third. You have to realize the people who win this competition are always the people who present last." Because the people at PS1 are only interested in the latest and greatest and coolest, and that difference of whether you're going third or fifth is the difference of winning or losing this competition. Now, that's a little sour grapes for me, but it's also a fun thing. And so what he said was, you'd better find a way to build this idea. So taking you through this idea, this is our first attempt at taking the different ideas. So this is PS1, this is the site where it's located. Basically, what we wanted to do was get you up and over the wall. That was the whole idea of the program, was to bridge the wall. And while bridging the wall, it was providing the way a bridge provides a great deal of experience and light, and it's almost a shadow-making machine. So this is that shadowed bridge structure with the program drawing on the next level, where you see where it's striped is where it's occupiable, where it's solid is where it's shadow, and there's simply the paths going up and over it. The yellow parts are basically the danceable areas. Everything else is a shadow caster. And then figuring out the structural system, this is basically our first foray into the wood structure, the sort of concertinaed woven structure that would create this surface. And then what holds it all together is a tension skin, which is bright yellow plastic grating and bright yellow plastic construction fence. So you're able to inhabit this bridge, both getting a drink and walking under it to cool off. And this is the biggest party in New York in the summer. It's actually one of the few places where young architects get a chance to do whatever they like. And so this is showing just that model and the renderings of being up and above the space. And then both Jeremy and I work for Shumi, so we can never let program alone. So the program goes beyond the dancing and beyond what's usually the program of a nightclub. It's usually the lights. It's not, and the music is taken care of by great DJs. So there's no lights because it doesn't get dark in New York until 10 o'clock in the summer. So the idea was to program it with all the various sprinklers, so that the DJ had a mechanism for getting people wet in different ways, whether it was the spinner or the spurter or the wave or the wand. This choreography was what took up. So the bridge was a constant, damp, misty space made up by this second program of the water. And then this is just simply the last image, looking at it from above and seeing the water slide that was part of the piece. No, it wasn't the last image. I lied. This is our first. Are these? Can you see this? Is it out of focus, Alexander? No, it's just. Sorry, guys, but these are usually These usually pop a little more. This is simply how we make this surface, and we'll see it again and again, is simply. It's in some ways it's a booleaning process. It's a projection process of the tightening and loosening of the grid of the structural requirements, which you see in the weave, and it's basically booleaned out of the solids that make up the piece. What was our invention, and we weren't thinking about Semper, we weren't thinking about Prouvé, we were simply thinking about the tectonics of connecting plywood. Plywood has if you spend money, it has a 5x10 sheet size, it has a 4x8 the other way. So we invented this knot, this connection that was and has been the X-clip. And that X-clip is at the heart of this whole system of thinking. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about these slides. I've shown these before and different. I don't want to blame you all. I just think a little darkness might help. So This is the second iteration of that, which was where we actually got to build it. We took our CS1 and we basically took the same system of, instead of it being a horizontal bridge surface, it was a display surface, same system of the ribs with a tension skin connecting it, but what the idea was here is an interior, so that the idea was to transform the architecture of the Architectural League in New York. And the thing was that in a historic building you can't touch anything. You can't put in a screw, you can't put in any glue, you can't connect to the wall. So we remade the surface. And this was done with a series of routed out 3-inch by, I don't know, 15 or 16 foot by 5 foot pieces of foam. And what we calculated we removed the knot with the specific exchange. So this one is actually much more of a model, taking up an architectural space and architectural scale. So this is, we brought it in, built it on the floor, turned it up, built another piece, turned it up, and it remade the space. The thing was, we didn't know the length of it, whether it was 15 feet or 20 feet or 8 feet, because the concertina and the give of the foam allowed it to push and pull. So once the surface came into play, it locked it down. So that projected surface, which is the idealized viewing surface for the exhibit of other architectural projects that we put together, holds it all together. So in some ways it's just a growing of the room to another event, which was this exhibition. It was New York 3 from 2003. And which brings us to this burst project that Tom mentioned that's been published everywhere. That we call it a burst for a lot of different reasons, mostly because that's how it ends up getting done. And we had a chance to build this prototype in Australia. It was a competition entry for Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, and a SICA competition for low-income housing. We did it for that, and then we had some friends of my partners they had a trailer and a piece of land within 10 minutes of the most incredible surfing beach about 4 hours north of Australia. So all of a sudden what was a low-income house in South Carolina became reprogrammed as a vacation home for an Anglican priest and his 3 children, dogs, and wife. And this is an early rendering of it, and this is the site, which is it's amazing. I mean, Jeremy, I always make fun of Jeremy because he's Australian, so we're always trying to say, well, what's so great about Australia? And I keep saying, well, look at your architecture. It's like you still have the Queen on your money, and people are building in beach country. They're building brick homes, like little tiny brick 2-story, 1-story homes. Now, since those houses have been built, there's a 100-year flood has been put in, so you have a 2-meter floodplain in this site. All right, there's the beach. And on the left is probably the most important diagram I'm going to show about this house, which is illegible. Okay, what the idea is behind this is that you can only control certain things. Everything is in movement. Everything is unstable. Everything is in process. Everything is in flux. So what we did with this house is this house has 3 parameters with which we've measured everything. We've measured the program, which is simply the bedrooms, the living spaces, the use patterns. We've measured the structure, which is simply the tightening and loosening, or the number of ribs with which it needs to support itself. And the last thing is that it's an incredibly environmentally measured system. So what these 2 sections are our attempts to balance the programs, the environment, and the structure all at one point. So those 2 points, those elements, those precision cuts are the only place where we knew it was happening. And then you're all familiar with the lofted technology. We simply lofted it together. Now, we lofted it together about 300 times until it started to take on the nuances, and then we went into it at different levels to try and control where things went in, where things came out. And then we took that same level of thought onto the site, where you see the plans of the street, the parking area, the bocce, cricket, basketball, and then the observations of the bleachers and the berm at the end. And so what was also doing was setting up a relationship not only with itself but with its site, so that the environment, if you change the location of the sun, you have to change the orientation of the glazing and the program. If you change the location of the shear walls, you have to change the patterning of the structure. If you change the environmental conditions of whether it's facing south, north, or east, you have different overhangs. So it tends to tighten and loosen, open and close. And what we tended to find was that the points where we could no longer control it, or where we didn't quite have control of the software, was where it broke down. The gaps or the gashes or the lacuna was where it opened up to the environment. So what you see here is simply it's facing north, but it's upside down. So it's facing a south. It's basically the same equivalent of facing south, with an overhang that protects in the winter, protects in the summer, and allows the sun to come all the way into the house in the winter. And what that comes from is trying to measure this environment, or measure things. Like you can draw one pattern, you can draw two patterns, but drawing the intermingling of those two patterns, the nuance of those two things coming together, in some ways the lack of gridness, in some ways the way that sort of becomes the sort of dirty geometry of this Descartes drawing of the universe, is what we started to understand about the house. The geometry, the order of I can't remember the artist, Rachel Whiting, and the Diderot images show how that stretching and pulling those conditions give you new programmatic pieces. So that becomes what looks like a normalized pattern. This is a structural diagram of the house. This is the Xing of the house, and that Xing is very important to us because it takes away the orientation. It takes away the predominance of each rib, and becomes much more of a mesh. And then you see here there's some secondary pieces of structure that come into that. So at the crossing points are where it's supported and lit from within. So in studying that, we started to understand that we had a symmetrical system, that everything around the points was symmetrical with the X, and it was extruded from that X. And so we started to look at the different ways symmetry is defined. We all tend to think that mirrored symmetry is the standard, that's the only way, but the Baroque was well ahead of us in that there's not only mirrored symmetry, there's a lattice symmetry, there's a symmetry of wallpaper, there's a spiral symmetry, there's the glided symmetry, and there's the translatory symmetry that George Hersey writes about in his Architecture of the Baroque. And why we were looking at the Baroque is, in some ways, we feel that the house, or that mixing of the environment, the program, and the structure is related to what our engineers do with their CFD studies, what they do with their structural studies. that in some ways the making of the house is directly related to science, and that has existed before. The same way that prefabrication has existed before, that relationship of science and art in the Baroque, in the Baroque, the science was proving that there was God. I don't think we're out to prove anything with science. I think we're understanding that science is a non-stable entropic condition that we're always coming up against. And one of the things, but by doing this work, we started to come across other ways with which that process could be used for the burst. This is two diagrams by Luigi Moretti, who was a fascist architect from studied with Mussolini and then kept practicing afterwards. And this is from a book that's the extended chapters of Towards a New Architecture. And the chapters are basically about surface and space, that the space of St. Peter's, Saint-Sidon, are the same way as a computer massing diagram. They're the same thing as an embryonic house massing condition. So, but that these spaces weren't enlivened until the surface was read, until the surface was broken down, until the openings and closings of that articulated condition came into play. So we started taking the massing, started studying it, and these are early study models. And then we started to say, well, one of the things that's going on in these churches is a sort of a projection system. And this is the Quirinale by Bernini. And the reason I show this is because one of the things that the loft does is it takes dissimilar geometric forms and creates new geometric conditions. Why Richard Serra based the torqued ellipses on Bernini instead of Borromini was because he spent time in the Quirinale where he realizes it's all coming to a center point, but that it's an oval, that there's a doubleness, that it's a torqued ellipse because it really doesn't work. An ellipse has 2 points instead of a singular point. And so that understanding that multiple points coming together were, I'm going to stop sighing about the images, were how the section of the house was known from the diagram, but never understood at any given point until we went in and redrew it. So that flow, that movement was captured with the process of designing the house. And with this diagram, in some ways, is the process, the design process. The massing or the casting of the overall shape is rubbed up against these are the rib patterns, and then those two things are interspersed, and you get the actual structure, the actual skeleton of the house. That skeleton has to respond, it has to be held. It's not structural until it's got the surface in play, and it's not continuous because of the limits and the constraints of plywood until we actually have this tectonic of the X-clip that connects it. So the massing, the breaking down of the massing with the structural pattern, the skinning of it, the unfolding and understanding that skin so that we could build it is what comes together, and you see here in the sort of fabrication diagram of all the pieces coming together. This is just another point about the organic of these multiple points coming together. I mean, I still never understood how Borromini figured it out without Rhino, but the house is very, very simple. It couldn't be more planned down. It's simply 3 bands. It's an exterior band of bleachers and deck. It's an interior band of dining, kitchen, living, and then there's an interstitial band of storage and vents, and then the back band of the sleeping area. You enter by coming in underneath it, wrapping around, and coming up the deck. The roof pattern that you see is Greg Lynn thought the house was going to actually be built transparent. I told them we didn't quite have that kind of budget. But the model is built transparent because we fell in love with the ribs, we fell in love with the patterning, we fell in love with the different conditions that you see here in the way there are very sheer, there's not much shear wall here as it comes closer to the edge, so they're a lot more tighter, they're open up there. The breaking down of those geometries to the ribs, and that same diagram of the unfold and structurizing of the massing. See here. What we did with the ribs is we actually tied them to the program, where in the living space it's a controlled 2 inches of that's constant throughout. In the bedroom space, it's smooth, and in the undercroft, it's all the way open. And here, what we're trying to do is we work with Bureau Happold. Bureau Happold does, the best part of Bureau Happold isn't their structural team, it's their mechanical. And they turned us on to the way that what they do in their mechanical systems is they take their structural diagrams of where the stresses are in an airplane wing, and they transpose them to they take the same language and they transpose it to light and airflow, so that they're actually able to figure out the microclimate of the house, the microclimate of when the vent is letting out, when the heat's coming through the top, when the cooling is kept in the back, and when it's protected at different times of the year from the overhangs. So they take all of the different diagrams of the sun, the wind, the moisture, and they measure the sort of main section of the house, and that measuring is how we were able to tweak it, how we're able to make it open, make it closed, because the main opening is this front piece, this clear story, this vent system, and then there's a secondary vent in the back that's used primarily in the summer. And then this is what that vent is turned into architecturally on the facade of the glazing system here and here at the clear story. What we're trying to do, we've built one, we've probably designed 40, the one is going to, in order to have another life, it has to become a multiple. And in the prefab, or the idea of the prefabrication, you constantly have to answer the question of cost, of ease of building, and the delivery. In some ways, the delivery system and the cost are the only thing that people are interested in. Well, we've tried to create another argument that these 3 elements of environment, program, and structure are handled in a specific way with the burst house. The structure is plywood, the environmental issues are passive solar, and the program are the basic domestic programs of how we live today. What's parallel to that is an Andy Warhol portrait. You know what a portrait is. You know it's going to be silkscreen and your image, but you're not always sure how it's actually going to carry that image into the world. So that we use that, and then these ingredients stolen from Buckminster Fuller from the Dymaxion house that show all the sort of characteristics he was interested in the 1950s of the basic unit, the family unit, the group unit. And what we're saying is by breaking those things down to smaller and smaller pieces with the fabrication technology, you're actually able to nuance all of those things. It isn't just simply a repetitive condition of the basic unit to different families, that you can actually set it up in almost any situation for living, environment, and structure. then so these diagrams take you through the basically the environmental issues of the glazing system, of the thickness of the structure, how that plays out all the way through it, how if you actually have a wind tunnel, you start to change the shape of these two bands, and those set up the rules with which we design the system. So you see here when the programs change orientation, the two golden bands in each of these are the basic separation of the house. So this becomes a courtyard house. This becomes open on all three sides. This becomes a crisscross where the opening sides of the house are the courtyard is an X opening, and then here it's a sort of simple zigzag fold. That those start to be different ways this would play out. This is just in some ways the way the light and air would come through in those different situations. And these where you start to negotiate the undercroft, the roof, and the way the ground profile is receiving it. And then this is just sort of taking the programs and breaking them down into a matrix. So what this becomes is sort of analog parametrics. When this was designed, we didn't have access to the software. We didn't have the understanding of the software. We were simply doing it naturally to sort of run it through as many different ways as we could. And in some ways that played out even in the process of building it. These next shots are just really, I'm going to go faster and just sort of take you through the exterior of the house. So that's it under construction next to its little brick neighbors. This is the back of the house, which we graphicked with the sort of exuberant flowers we're stealing from surfers and anime artists. That's it from the street view. That's it up close as you wrap around the building. It's the same position from the exterior and the interior, and then you sort of fly around to the deck and bleacher. Great drawing. And that's the entrance piece. That's that entrance piece at night. So what that entrance piece does is it completes the geometry. It allows you to see who's coming and going, who's visiting, who's arriving. So the form stays the same, but the material shifts. And the undercroft has become one of the things that is actually the most user friendly. That you spend this is built in the same environment as Southern California, so the undercroft is actually is always accessible. But what we did was we left it all the way open, and it became so deep that we could actually start to program storage and these sort of wormholes for holding surfboards and fishing poles and all the rest of the accoutrements of the beach. This is the sort of entrance sequence. It was originally going to be all wood pylons, but we decided that since there were parking underneath that we should have some concrete involved. So the concrete is at different heights. The higher ones show you the entrance. So if you follow the high pieces of concrete, these are like 1.3 meters, these take you to the entrance stair, which then takes you up through and around to the front facade. And this series basically puts you inside the dining room, the living room looking back. And this is the storage and vented space in between, which we call the bow tie. There's the rear vent. So you see here in the living spaces, it's this kind of it's been called Gothic filigree of the ribbing, and as you go back into the back spaces, it's smoothed over, so you end up in almost this Turrell-like room. There's no direct light in the back bedrooms, except for the reflected light of from the sun and the synthetics of the fluoros inside. Sort of that's the west end of the house and the east end of the house coming together without the rooms. This is a much better slide. And so this is that transition point. And then that's looking back. So basically the back bedrooms don't have any direct sun, but they have this clear story. They don't have any direct view, but you have the clear story bringing sun in from above. And in the next generation, because we do think this house is a snowflake, that there will be many of them, no two alike, but that there will be multiples. We've been forced and are excited to have the opportunity to build more of them. And so we started studying these processes of not only the delivery system, but the actual building of it. So this is the Maison Tropicale, which Prouvé built in 1949 in the French Congo. And it's basically a passive environmental system that's put together with this big truss that's loaded up, and then all of the pre-made panel pieces. So his idea of prefab was that everything had a unique connection, but there were multiples of the same. There were roof panels and floor panels and wall panels that all were held up by this truss/vent system. So really want to take you quickly through. I mean, you see this everywhere. You guys have got probably a better laser cutter upstairs, but how this house is built was actually the same way things are built on our tables in the office. It was an industrial-sized laser cutter cut the 400 sheets of plywood, and then they delivered these to the site, basically in their skins, and they were held together and brought to site. And this is the way they looked in the first iteration of putting it together with the burned edges of the laser. And what it required was we had to sort it all out. We had to figure out each rib and place it down in a row so that we could put it together. And I think that's one of the things that Tom's mentioning about the article, the Metropolis articles. It wasn't so successful. The barn raising of putting up the ribs went up in 3 weeks, and then we had to pass it off to a contractor. We didn't cut enough stuff. Everything that was cut by the laser went up quickly and precisely and somewhat easily compared to normal construction. But once we had to leave it to the contractors to measure, we sort of lost control for a short time. But this control of putting those things together, we had the rib system was held together with these X clips, and there's 5 different X clips. This is the normal X clip that ties into the ribs. This is the normal X clip with a shear condition for the floor. This is the diagonal for the bleachers, and this is a column clip. So in different places, you would have this field of X clips that would come onto the skin, and the plywood wasn't even only cut to the specific rib shape. The flat shapes had the screw holes and the X meeting points onto them, so that it was like a big IKEA piece that came together like that. And that's just before it's tightened. And so that ribbing system, then you see here, this is the sort of mother of all columns, where we have the collar brace, the shear connection, and the X clip all in one piece. No, those are stainless steel. They're stainless steel, but our stainless steel people are in New Jersey, and they do stuff for us because they love us, and we give them problems. But the rest of the time they spend making helicopter blades for the American military. So they're the type of people that ask you, do you want that .007 curve on the inside or the outside? They're more precise than we'll ever be. So in some ways, the house is built with absolutely no tolerance. And that was one of the first problems we had, was there's absolutely no tolerance in the system. So to put it into place, you simply tighten, push, or pull. We got to the point where we were at the end of the barn raising, and we were off about 7 or 8 inches. So Jeremy and I were like, okay, kids, let's just cut the edge. We'll just chop it off. And I mean, so the people putting it together were like, absolutely not. They wouldn't let us. Because they had spent more time tightening and loosening and putting the bolts together, they said, no, we can fix it. And they got a couple car jacks and some belts, and they started pushing and pulling. And after about 15 minutes, that 10 inches was taken care of. So the house has absolutely no, because actually, if the tolerance isn't, if you build it with a tolerance in it, it'll accrue and nothing will line up when you start putting the interior pieces in and the diamond shapes that hold it in from the inside. So what we did, it's also held up on 50 columns, each with a different height. So in order to build it, we built a scaffolding with sort of dentals of little teeth holding all the pieces in, and then so we would take and we'd build a segment of it upside down, screwing it from below, schlep it over, rotate it, and then so we would build different every 8 feet basically, or excuse me, every 4 feet we would build a solid piece the whole length of the house and then bolt it together with the secondary pieces. So it was basically a weaving process. And so there you see it as the floors coming together. And then we suspended the columns off of the X-clips, and so we didn't have to measure the height, and then simply connected them to the sonotubes and poured the concrete in. So there was this grand moment when you went from the support being shifted from 3 lines to 50 points. But it was actually quite a good learning process, because we simply just cut the datum in the ribs, and so that datum stayed on the scaffolding, and that the shift was minor. It was simply just pulling it. And once that happened, we started putting in the shear walls to receive the roof. And that's the sort of the wrapping of it around the bottom. And that's the clear story at the top with the gutter as part of the form of the house. And there you see it under construction, and that's the model when it went from clear to pink. And this is the process of what I mean, in some ways we hated painting it. It was sort of beautiful in its black cut edge pieces. I'll go faster. So you see here, this is the bleachers coming down. So these tended, we have a whole set of plan sections and details, but we tended to build the house from these fabrication drawings. Like this drawing was basically the drawing that built the house. It was the axonometric with all the ribs clearly set up, and then all the numbers are on this drawing, which you can't see here. And then there's basically an Excel sheet locating where every piece came from and which line it had to go into. And so then this was the sort of the weave completing itself with the roof. And then this, we love to show this because it's like the lightness of the project is also one of the basic. I mean, that's really what was left over, because we used those pieces to hold all the shapes, and then basically it was kindling or whatever. But that was basically the wastage from the house, which sets up a question. It's no longer about. I mean, I don't think prefab is really about cost so much as it is about control. I mean, having this little waste is a form of control, and that lightness, along with the control, is one of the ways of making it work. We've since, I wanted to just very quickly, we've since been asked to do, is it just a single family house or could it be multiple? So this is two 6-unit pieces where you start to see the plan. The different units are all connected with a concrete stair tower between the units, so that you get 1, 2, 2, and 1 to get your 6 units. And you start to get a section where you're looking out of this double height space and looking into this streetscape that can then, that undercroft can be it can be turned into retail, commercial, or artist space. So it can actually make an urban transition from the vacation house. And this is sort of the last two pieces of it. And then we, just to stay on point, we were asked to make it a birdhouse, which all we did was change the scale. So all of a sudden the program changes the scale, but then rather than the columns, we had to come to a single point of this armature. And this is on permanent display at Postmaster Gallery on 19th Street and 10th Avenue in New York. And it's basically, this is it in the gallery space before it went up on the roof. But it basically, the whole force of the structure comes back to this single pole. And it's the burst BOP because it's built for birds of prey. They're kestrels in New York, and they eat little rodents. And so it was painted pink and hangs out on that side, and the birds come and live there. So it's kind of a silly but kind of fun manipulation of the project. So one of the things that we're involved in the project now, we're making this house it's going to be built in New York next July. It's going to be a 1-to-1 version, the next version of this house. It'll have a different form and a different program, but it'll be basically the same system of making. And so we started to understand we had to look into the methods of delivery. This is an easy one, right? The Model T, the assembly line, the sort of Taylorist version. We discovered that Thomas Edison had an interest in prefabrication. This is a single pour house. You basically build the floors, the walls, and everything, and you pump it through in a single pour, and that's the house you get from Tom Edison. This is the famous Lustrin house, which I think everybody's probably familiar with. And it has an incredible delivery system. It's delivered on a truck. It's got this incredible collection of pieces. They arranged their pieces much nicer than we did for our slide. This was how it was originally built in 1949 near Rockefeller Center. But the problem is you only get this. You only get the same damn house over and over and over again. The Demaxian house has a much more interesting delivery process. As everything with Buckminster Fuller, the model and the placing of the base and then the building up of the ribs. It's quite an incredible production. We started to learn things from the sort of moment frames that hold it together. Jean Prouvé, not only did we steal or study his building process, his delivery process was kind of beyond the pale. These are cargo containers for all the pieces of Maison Tropicale. It was put onto this beautiful French cargo plane, and this is the house that was delivered. That was eventually built. There were 3 of them built in the Congo. In other projects of the office, we've handled this delivery system with using the Fortis technology of breaking it down to pieces and putting it in a cab and turning it into a sofa. And we've also sort of tried to critique the container house as the container as a house, and saying, well, the container is for bringing pieces of structure, and that architecture's value is to have some sort of notice of a transition, especially in war-torn Bosnia. This was a competition entry for Kosovo. And then there's always we just can't get that far from Buckminster Fuller. I think we just wish we had helicopters and trailers to bring our houses in. And this movement idea. So there's 2 ideas of the I think that are embedded in the lofting of the houses. One is that everything's in flux, everything's moving, everything's in motion. And the other is that you can break those things down into smaller and smaller pieces. Is the sort of critique of the Taylorist assembly line conditions of fabrication. So what this is from one of my studios at Columbia, we were studying movement, and one of the students found this nanobot that was designed just down the bay, down the bay at Stanford, where each one of these little machines is its own entity, its own brain, its own program, but together they create a mechanism that can crawl up the stairs. I think oh, it won't stop. I practiced. So we basically analyzed that movement, broke it down into, doubled up the nanobots so that we could actually handle it for the stairs, and sort of started to study all the different positions required to go up a set of fire stairs, and it sort of kind of created this beautiful snake, and then you can't see the bottom of it, but then we loaded that snake with a container. That container was made up of 3 pieces. So in order for the container, which is actually a pram, we were asked by the New York Times to design a baby carriage for getting in and out of the subway, because there's no elevators in New York subway system. So in order to turn the corners, you have to do 2 tracks like a tank. In order to handle the weather and bumps and grinds of the subway, you need a Kevlar crate, and in order for comfort for your little one, you need a lattice mesh that's suspended in there, and so that your child can go up and down the stairs with no problem. So this level of, if we can deliver a child, we're more than happy to take on the agenda of delivering the house in a more efficient manner than hanging it off of scaffolding. So what we discovered in the constantina of this was that the structure can be compressed and then opened on site. You'll see in this video that then we add the clips, but what we're planning on doing is changing the next generation of the clips to be hinges, so that you unfold the house on site, and you start to skin it on the interior, the floors, the back, the sides. I think those will come in next. And then you support it from below, and then put in the final pieces of steel. These pieces of steel are in some ways where the system breaks down, where the openings come into play, and so the steel is an added secondary structure, a sort of redundant system within the plywood to hold it together. Then we tend to tattoo it with the location and program of the beach house. So these last few images are how we plan the next generation of delivery, which up here, what we've discovered was rather than pouring foundations, we can use these helical, they're basically big corkscrews. You can use a helical foundation that goes down about 8 feet. You can take them and put them in almost any site, rock, sand, clay. And so we're going to put down a series of, we're actually, the next one we're going to build is going to be in the parking lot. So we're going to take a series of helical conditions and put them in a parking lot. And then we're going to have 2 conveyor belts. These 2 conveyor belts, like the bringing stuff in and out of McDonald's, on scissors jacks. Then the 2 trucks will come loaded up with the ribs pre-made and pull up side to side on either side of the conveyor belts. The hinges will drop them to the proper level, and then we'll rotate the weave up onto the conveyor belts. And so the house then will open from the 2 trucks and create, this is it at like 10% open, this is at 50% open, to where it opens all the way before it's skinned. So that's how we're going to deliver it from now on. It's going to be coming onto these conveyor belts, and then when the conveyor belts are removed, there'll be moment frames underneath it, replacing them. And then you'll end up with this basic structure that's lifted up on the scissors jacks, and then the structural system is put into play. So that's where we are with this process of the burst house as a system and an idea, and hopefully a replicable architecture. Thank you. Any questions?
So what changes structurally when your little brackets are now hinges instead of brackets?
Nothing. The hinges don't really. The exits do nothing in the horizontal. They're only shear.
So it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The hinges, so the skin is what takes care of this. The skin is the primary shear. The secondary shear are the interior wall and basically the steel trusses that are in the shear story and the front facade. So we're bringing those steel trusses down. We're making it sort of moment frames for underneath the house, so that the forces come all the way through. What we're looking forward to is a different program of how we come together, or different environments. We haven't really pulled up. Which is actually the same. It's R30 in Australia. It might as well be R30 in North. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. It doesn't. The house is covered with a plain mirror skin. It's basically a resin. It's basically a resin skin that handles a 300% expansion. So the environment is going to change the material. It's still going to be plywood. There might be, somebody wanting mahogany wood on the interior. I guess would be open to it, but it's more. Or we did one for Dr. Pepper out of glass. It was for the band in a bubble competition. They didn't quite get it, but so environmentally, it's actually more about the overhang, the orientation, the breathability, the insulation. We've been asked to do one in Maine. We're going to have a very, very different environmental condition, right? So what we do is we simply change the thickness. Those are the roofs and walls are basically 8 and 6 inches thick, and the floors are about 10 inches minimum. So we just simply change those thicknesses, or put in what we'll probably do on the floors. We put in pre-insulated disc panels so that it can handle the rougher weather. So the environment. One of the interesting things is what if you have, what if you look at the Eichler houses and stuff, if they're on the street, that they want the sun coming into the south side of the street itself, and still want privacy. You tend to put up things like a skin or a trim or that sort of, and all that language is in the house, and it's sort of just how you reuse that language for different problems that we're most. I think the environment is actually the funnest part, because it's the most similar to the methodology our engineers use, and so it's easy to sort of tweak it that way. The next round of it is actually a much more sophisticated digital model than what you're seeing here. The digital model is precise, but it's not sophisticated with regards to the environment quite yet. All set? Thank you very much.